Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear learners. Welcome to English Grade 7 video lecture series. Today is our very first lecture of Unit 11. Dear learners, let's see what we are supposed to do today. We are going to learn about a student's learning outcome that is of the competency of grammar and vocabulary. And we are going to talk about comparative and relative clauses. I hope that you have watched the introductory lecture where I introduced you with all the different SLOs. So let's get started with our lecture number 1's SLO, identify and construct sentences with a comparison clause and with a relative clause. So let's see how do we do it and how do we achieve this learning outcome. I hope, students, that you have basic knowledge of your clauses. We know that a clause is a part of a sentence. It's a chunk that has a subject and a verb, and that makes it a clause. A clause can be dependent. It means that it has to have other information and to make sense. But a clause can also be independent. It means that it can make sense on its own. So now we are going to see what are comparison clause, what are relative clause. Now, think of a time you describe someone or something by comparing it to another. For example, we know the comparison rules. My dog is friendlier than my cat. Now, we compared my dog with my cat by using the comparative adjectives degree, and then we used THAN then. Or by adding more information, for example, the book that I read last night was amazing. Now, let us ask you, let's share your examples. So now, students, we know adjectives are having degrees where the first one is positive, next one is the comparative degree, and the next after that one is actually superlative degree. So when we are comparing something, we use the word then over and again, right? THAN, then. Now, whenever we are using then in our clauses or any comparative word, that automatically becomes comparative clause. So let us make sentences with comparison by using the word then. Take few minutes, do it, and come back quickly. All right. Let's talk about comparative clause now. A comparative clause is a type of subordinating clause. Yes, it means that a subordinating clause is dependent. So we can always find our comparative clause in the dependent clause. That follows the comparative form of an adjective or adverb. Now, students, you know that adjectives have comparison degrees like comparative and superlative, and adverb also has degrees, and it begins with then or like. As the name indicates, a comparative clause expresses a comparison. For example, if I say Shiza is smarter than I am, now what is the word that we use for comparison? Then, right? So this part of the sentence, this clause is called comparison clause because there is a comparative word over here, then. Then I am. Shiza is smarter than I am. And if you take then I am on its own, this is dependent. It doesn't make any sense. We need more information. So when we say Shiza is smarter than I am, so smarter than I am, this part then I am is your comparison clause because it has the word then, which is used for comparison, comparing adjectives. Now, let's talk about some more examples over here. So this is how you typically follow the structure. You have your main clause, which is the independent clause. All right, independent clause. We know what is an independent clause, plus any comparative word, for example, then, as, or like, and then your subordinating clause. And when you combine your then or this kind of word with subordinating clause, that becomes comparative clause or comparison clause. Now let's have a look at all these different examples. I hope that you can clearly read this on the screen. Sam arrived later than Ali. So, what is the comparison clause over here? Later than Ali. This is a comparison clause. She runs faster than her brother. Again, this is a comparative clause. He is as smart as his sister. So, as his sister is comparative clause. This cake is like the one we had yesterday. So, like the one we had yesterday. This is a subordinating clause, right? Dependent clause. But since we have the word like, it becomes comparative clause. Now, quickly, students, find out about the comparative clauses in the remaining examples by yourself quickly, and then we can talk about relative clause. Now again, a subordinating clause, a dependent clause which has relative words, relative pronouns, and that makes it relative clause. A relative clause is a subordinating clause that describes or modifies a noun. It is also called an adjective clause. So you can call it adjective clause as well. It adds information to sentences by using a relative pronoun. What are the relative pronouns? Can we recall relative pronouns? Yes. Who, that, which, etc. All these are relative pronouns. So whenever you find these relative pronouns in your clauses, it becomes relative clauses. For example, the air was filled with mouth-watering aromas that instantly made my stomach growl. Now, the air was filled with mouth-watering aromas. This is an independent clause. It makes sense. It is very much clear. But the next part, that instantly made my stomach growl, this part is the dependent clause. And this is a dependent clause, this is a subordinating clause, but is it a comparative clause or a relative clause? Yes, this is relative clause because we have the word that in it. We are using our relative pronouns. So whenever you have words like who, which, that, and other words like these, you can say that this kind of clause is relative clause. A relative pronoun is a word that introduces a dependent or relative clause and connects it to a noun or pronoun in the main clause. Relative pronouns, what do? They help provide more information about the noun or pronoun, and it creates a relationship between the clauses. So, these are the common relative pronouns that we use in our relative clauses: who, whom, whose, which, that. Now, let's look at these examples. The teacher who helped me is very kind. This is an additional information about the teacher. So, who helped me is very kind. Dependent clause, and it is dependent upon the teacher. And this part over here tells us that it is a relative clause. This is the book that I was talking about. She is the student whose project won the prize. So whose project won the prize? This is a subordinating clause, and it's a relative clause because we have the pronoun whose in it, right? So apply these rules to the rest of the sentences. Now students, you are very much clear about relative clauses and subordinate and also comparative clauses, right? Let's talk about the classroom activity that we are supposed to do. Read the given sentences and notice the use of the comparison clause. Comparison clause. I eat more than you do. Yes. Comparative. Why? It's a comparison clause because we have the word then. Then you do. They come from the same part of Pakistan as I come from. So, as I come from, this is our comparison clause. Saira smiles like her mother. This is a comparison clause. He did not behave as he usually does. As he usually does, and my backpack is bigger than Junaid's. So bigger than Junaid's is also our comparison clause. Now, let's talk about part B of the activity. Complete the given sentences by using the comparison clause. Now, Shazia is nearly as tall as a giraffe. Yes, right? As a tower, as anything that the thing that is taller. Are these shoes the same as hers? This painting is more beautiful than the one over there. So we completed the comparison clause. We just had a hint of comparison and we completed with our own words. So do these two by yourself, and let's talk about the simulation link. Students, you will get additional information if you watch this YouTube video in your leisure time. Let's talk about the worksheet. I hope that you can see the worksheet over here. You have to find out and complete the sentences using the comparative form of the adjectives in these blanks. Then part B is you have to fill in the blanks using as to make comparisons. We know how do we make comparisons, right? So, and you have your skill sheet as well, a question bank. Now let's talk about the homework. Complete the sentences by adding the relative clause. This is the man whom I saw yesterday. Yesterday. So this is how you're going to complete your relative clauses. Whom is a relative pronoun, and that makes it a relative clause. The proposed homework is make sentences using relative pronouns in your notebook. You can make 5 to 10 sentences, but those sentences must have a dependent and independent clause, and the dependent clause has to have a relative clause in it by using the relative pronouns. My dear learners, this was all about today's lecture. Here are your resources that you will get in the description of the video. And thank you so much for attending this lecture, dear learners. I hope that you have learned a lot, and we have covered our students' learning outcome of comparative and relative clauses. I'll see you in the next video lesson. Till then, Allah Hafiz.